Boxing philosophy is about understanding. For example, how does Holyfield land his left hook? How does Canelo land his left hook to the body? And who owns the best jab in boxing? These questions, they open doors. They push us to explore the different elements of the sport, whether it's the punches, the timing, the rhythm. And there are also less visible layers, whether it's the glove size, the contracts, the psychology of victory, the psychology of defeat, and the unique environment that each trainer builds. Question: what truly makes a great trainer? Is it the strategy that they design, or is it the culture that they create in the gym? Boxing philosophy is about asking sharp questions, even when there are no clear answers. Because in the search for answers, understanding grows. So let's talk about Naseem Hamed and the problem with his new biopic called Giant. Now, before we go into that, let's clarify one thing. Naseem Hamed was a great fighter, and my personal recollection of Naseem Hamed, well, one of my first recollections was his fight against Robinson, and I believe that was a title fight, and he was brutally dominant in that fight. And then I remember the Kevin Kelly fight, and that was like a 3-round war where they were both put on the canvas and they both had to get up from the canvas, and it was just up and down, and it was just so exciting. And then I remember the Tom Johnson, I remember the Tom Johnson fight. And again, he dominated Tom Johnson. He just controlled the distance, made him miss, and just hit him with his backhand and just utterly destroyed him. It was a very dominant performance from an elite fighter. And I would say that Prince Naseem Hamed, and we'll talk about the film in a minute, but Prince Naseem Hamed, he was a British superstar. Actually, no. He was a global superstar, a world superstar. He had charisma, he had confidence. And I can remember the entrances and I can remember the knockouts. He was so confident. And if my memory serves me correctly, I believe one time he came out in an entrance on like a flying carpet. Like the entrances were just so flamboyant. He was well ahead of his time with regards to the entertainment level. And of course, Prince Naseem represented the Ingle boxing style, which was like British boxing intelligence, but redefined. And I think that's important. Now, like I said, he has a biopic called Giant. The executive producer is Sylvester Stallone. Now, executive producer is an interesting one because it can just mean brand credibility or financial contribution. It doesn't necessarily mean that they were personally involved. We don't know the nature of the involvement. What we do know, or what's been alleged by Prince Naseem himself, is that he was not consulted with regards to the movie. He had no input, allegedly. This, to me, creates the question, is there a difference between legal and ethical with regards to him not having the permission or not having any input? And sometimes things can be legal, but they might not be ethical. Of course, if you had a film about your life, you would want an input into that. That's a natural inclination. If someone's telling your story, you would want some input in how that story is being told, and you would want that story to be told in a correct manner. Of course, the film business, or I assume the film business, is about making a good movie as opposed to being truthful. This is called poetic license. Of course, we can argue about what is a good movie. A good movie to one person is different to another. But I think it's about creating a narrative or creating an element of sensationalism. And from what I've been told, the film is not just about Naseem Hamed, it's about Naseem Hamed and Brendan Ingle. It's about their relationship. And of course, Brendan Ingle was Naseem Hamed's trainer. So here's a question. If Prince Naseem Hamed is unhappy with the film, why is he promoting it? He's going around, he's doing interviews. So I'm not sure if he's unhappy, but he definitely is stating categorically that he didn't have input and he wasn't part of the process. So I guess you can be unhappy with not being part of the process, but you could be happy with the film or happy that your name is being given some type of recognition. And let's just briefly talk about Brendan Ingle, because Brendan Ingle deserves a lot of credit. He created the boxing system and the boxing environment, which was innovative. He brought a different boxing philosophy. to the traditional British techniques. The traditional British techniques was to hold your hands up. His fighters, they were switch hitters, which was not really heard of within the British boxing ecosystem. Switch hitting, for those that don't know, is being able to box with the left foot forward, but also be able to turn southpaw and box with the right foot forward. And there was a focus not just on hand placement, but on footwork. He understood the importance of footwork. He understood the importance of distance and the importance of nuance. So Brendan Ingle deserves a lot of credit, and hopefully this sheds some light on the brilliance of Naseem Hamed and the brilliance of Brendan Ingle. Hopefully the film captures the magic they gave to boxing. Hopefully it shines that light, because that is a light that does deserve to be shined, because I feel that a lot of people have forgotten about the impact of Prince Naseem Hamed. I mean, he was huge. He was absolutely huge. And it was one of those situations where you had to be there to experience it. And when I say there, I don't mean at the fights, but be actually, seeing like his appearances in the articles, his fights and the buzz and the hysteria around his name. And of course, he had captured the British public, but he also captured the American public. He was a British brand, an American brand, a global brand. Floyd Mayweather, some regard as the best fighter of all time, others would say the best offensive fighter of all time, stated that Prince Naseem Hamed doesn't get the respect he deserves, particularly in Britain. And I think there's some truth to that. And here are the facts. The facts are he's a 5-time world champion. What an amazing achievement. It's hard to be a British champion. It's hard to be a European champion. It's hard to be a champion. But he was a 5-time champion. And he was inducted into the Hall of Fame. For those that don't know, that's sharing the company of Muhammad Ali, Evander Holyfield, Lennox Lewis, Joe Korzagi, Pernell Whitaker, Sugar Ray Robinson. I would argue that Naseem Hamed was elite, and he had a fan-friendly style. He had an innovative boxing style. And you got to credit Brendan Ingle with inputting that system into Prince Naseem Hamed, with having that knowledge and being able to nurture Prince Naseem Hamed. Because often I've stated that boxing is partly about teaching. There's no doubt about that. But it's also about nurturing the appropriate boxing environment. Great champions are nurtured in great boxing environments. And I feel that Brendan Ingle had this innovative system. And remember, the boxing education system at that time was very different to the American boxing education system. So Brendan Ingle, I felt, was an innovator within the British ecosystem. And I'm kind of hoping that the film shines a light on both of these characters in a positive way. And hopefully it shines a light on Brendan Ingle, a great trainer, and also Naseem Hamed as a great fighter, because I do feel that he is slept on. He is a great fighter. And like I said, he wasn't just a British superstar. He was a global superstar, and he accomplished so much. And it's good to see him back in the public arena. So here are some final observations. The first observation is this a good film? Because that's important. Is it a good film? Hopefully it's not a bad film. And who is the film made for? Is it made for the casuals, or is it made for the boxing fans? And it's interesting because Naseem Hamed is promoting it, but he didn't have an input into the process. And I think a lot of boxing fans may feel a way about that. And interestingly, even though Sylvester Stallone is on the credits as an executive producer, what role did he play in this? Will he promote it? Did he have any creative input behind the scenes? And then how accurate is the depiction? How accurate does this reflect what really happened, whether it was in the ring, outside the ring? How accurate is this? And is it more of an objective perspective on Naseem Hamed and Brendan Ingle, or is it more subjective? Because as we know, Naseem Hamed wasn't involved in the creative input. So who was involved in the creative input? And from which perspective is the story being told? And when we ask about how accurate is the depiction, does it matter? Does it matter if it's accurate, if it's entertaining, if it's a good film? Or should it be accurate? Or should it be a combination of both? Accuracy to really connect, but obviously some poetic license, because that's typical in the film industry. And hopefully this will shine a light back on Naseem Hamed and Brendan Ingle. Now, despite his perspective, Naseem Hamed speaks about the emotions of the final scene, and that for me piques an interest into that final scene. I'm really hoping this is a good film. And like I said, I hope it shines a light back on Naseem Hamed and Brendan Ingle because they've both made significant and massive contributions to boxing. So Smith knocks out Mateus at the Barclays Center, and he is now the WBC super lightweight champion. This is great for British boxing, and it's obviously great for Dalton Smith, and it's a great accomplishment. Dalton Smith, of course, was the underdog, and Dalton Smith was unbeaten. He was unbeaten coming into the fight, but he was untested at world level. In boxing, there are many different levels: British level, European level, title challenger level, world level, etc. So he was unbeaten but untested. But they gambled. They, being Dalton Smith and his team, they rolled the dice, and the gamble paid off. I guess the fortune did favour the brave in this context. It's a great performance. Congratulations to Dalton Smith. But let's analyse the fight and give some perspective. So these are just some notes that I had from the fight. So in round one, Smith was moving around. So he was moving around the ring, and he was using the jab to the head, and also occasionally he would pop the jab to the body. I actually remember him briefly turning southpaw, but this was brief, and he's clearly an orthodox fighter. He threw some short left hooks, and at times he was walking, as Mateus was walking forward, he would walk him onto the right hook, and he's looping that right hand. Now Mateus, what is Mateus doing? Now Mateus is moving forward. He's using his feet to put pressure on Smith, but he's not punching. So what he's doing, he's making Smith work very, very hard. So Smith is working out a high work rate, but Mateus is using his feet to get in range, but he's not punching, and he's not using any half steps, so he's not avoiding any of the punches either. However, in my estimation, Smith is moving well, he's using his jab, and he's clearly winning the round. The only downside is that he's working very, very hard. So in round two, Smith again is using movement, he's landing the jab, and he's throwing that right hand. Mateus at times is catching it with the left glove. And this is interesting here because Smith starts holding, but it's strategic holding. It's something he's been doing in his camp, because what he's doing, he's holding Mateus and then he's pushing him back. And that's really important, because that by pushing him back, when they're separated, that means Smith has got all this space to move around. So it's hard to pin him on the ropes, because when they get in the clinch, Smith pushes Mateus back, and that shows that he has strength as well. So Smith is showing some good strength in the clinch. Smith again is outworking Mateus. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing Mateus's name. Now Mateus, at one point in round two, he's just been silent. He's using his feet to get in range. But then at one point, he just starts going through the phases, starts throwing a lot of punches. And Smith is covering up, again, an overhand right. Smith throws an overhand right, or a right hook, sorry, and then he throws a jab straight right. So that was nice. Those phases were nice, because he catches the right hook, which makes his guard come wider, and then he slips a 1-2 to bring the punches down the middle. So that was good punch creativity from Smith. And Smith is using his jab to outwork Mateus. However, Mateus is getting closer with the feet. He's making Smith work, and he's starting to open up a bit. The pros for Smith is that I believe he's winning the rounds, but he's working very, very hard. So let's move to round three. At this point, Smith is actually pushing Mateus back. So, he's been moving a lot. But in round three, he just kind of pushes Mateus back and starts to get into the pocket. And this is when Smith is shortening up his punches. This is a good thing. He's taking the power out of the punches, but by shortening up the punches, that means you can throw more punches. This is something that Lennox Lewis used to do. So this is a good thing. He's making adjustments. However, should he be in the pocket this early? That's one thing you could ask. Mateus is being forced back to the ropes. I think that's negative for him, but there's a pace that may be favorable for him. Now Smith is landing. He's starting to introduce the right hand to the body. So he's been using the jab. He's throwing the right hook to the head. Sometimes he's coming with the 1-2, sometimes he's coming with the left hook, but now he's introducing the right hand to the body, and this is a good investment for if the fight goes later. And then there's this ferocious exchange at the end, and again, Mateus just, he just starts going through the phases. He goes quiet, and then he goes through the phases. So this clearly, I guess, is Mateus's identity. He puts pressure on you, he makes you work hard, and then he starts to punch hard. Smith, again, I think is outworking Mateus. He's outworking him, but the pace is a very, very fast one. And I feel like Smith needs to try to slow down the tempo if possible, because it's doubtful that anyone would be able to maintain that acceleration for 12 rounds. So now we go to round 4, and Smith again is using that strategic holding. That was a very good strategy in this fight. And he also does a nice reverse 1-2. For those that don't know, that's the straight right and then the straight left or the left jab. And for reference, Kell Brook threw an amazing reverse 1-2 against Khan in the first round of their fight. Smith is starting to pick up the jab again because, remember, in round 3, he was getting close in the pocket. And Smith again is walking Mateus onto his punches. So what's happening here is that when Smith tries to rest, that's when Mateus picks up the pace. So again, I guess this is his identity. This is part of the way he fights. He puts pressure on you, and when you start to slow down, then he starts to explode. And now they're starting to exchange punches. So this is a dangerous time for both of them, because when you're exchanging punches, it increases the chances of getting knocked out exponentially. There's a wonderful left hook from Smith, though. Left hook thrown off the back foot and just really catches Mateus clean. I think at the moment Mateus is a little bit deficient defensively. I feel like he needs to tighten up his defensive responsibilities. And again, I think Smith is winning these rounds. Boxing is subjective, so maybe you could have given it to Mateus, but Smith, from my perspective, is ahead. However, he's still working very hard. And now he has a cut to contend with. So it's in the balance. And now we go to round 5, and this ended up being the last round. And the fight is evolving. Again, Smith is using that holding technique. He's going back to that. This holding technique reminds me of when Evander Holyfield fought Mike Tyson in the first fight. Evander used the clinch to really assert dominance and to push Tyson back. Now the fight is getting closer to the pocket. So in round 1, Smith was making it like an outside fight, but now they're getting closer and closer together. Now, again, the fight is being very competitive. Mateus is using his feet to put a lot of pressure on Smith, but all of a sudden Smith throws, if I have it rightly, he throws like a jab, a soft jab, and a straight right through the target. Clearly Mateus is hurt. Then he repeats the sequence 3 times over. So he lands the right hand through the target 3 times over, and then the fight is over, and Smith becomes the world champion. This is a great performance by Dalton Smith. Absolute great performance. I feel like Mateus was a little bit defensively irresponsible, but at the end of the day, he's a champion. He clearly came to fight. He came to, to bring the heat, and he was really pushing Dalton Smith. And, this would have been a unique environment for Dalton Smith, because this is the first time he's fighting for the world champion belt, and he excelled. So congratulations first to Dalton Smith. What an amazing achievement. And what's great is that it was even though he was winning the fight, it was a competitive fight, and it was a fight that was asking questions. And in that round 5, he sensed the opportunity, and he took it with that 3 phases of throwing those right hands. Now, what did I like about the fight? I like the strategic holding. Clearly, that's something they're working on in camp. I like the movement. I love those right hands through the target, particularly in the final round. When he used the jab, it was effective. And Smith showed some really good power. And he kept his composure in this world title fight, which was a unique experience to him. Also, he showed psychologically that he's very strong. He did not wilt under pressure. He showed character. He showed resistance. Now, obviously, this is a great achievement, so we don't want to be too critical. But in terms of Smith's development, I feel like he could have used the jab more. I feel like maybe there could have been some more punch creativity. And I'm not sure if he could have kept up that pace for 12 rounds. So I feel that maybe he needs to work on controlling the pace of fights. But a fighter's evolution is a constant path. Mastery is a constant path. And at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, Smith passed the test. He went in to become champion, and he became champion. So congratulations to Dalton Smith on a spectacular victory. So Moses Atama has an injury. He has an injury, which means the fight will be rescheduled. Now, the good news about this is that you should never go into a fight with an injury, because when you go into a fight with an injury, you increase the risk of losing and you increase the risk of worsening the injury. And injuries, they prevent momentum and they can affect your psychology. And from a capitalist perspective, from the financial element, and let's remember, boxing is entertainment and entertainment has a relationship with capitalism. It can cause problems. Too many injuries, cancellations, this costs money. And it can affect your pocket and it can affect the pockets of those around you. However, fighters have come back from injuries. So let's give a reference point. So Evander Holyfield, he had major shoulder problems. I believe this started to surface in the Michael Moorer fight, the first Michael Moorer fight. Now, of course, if you've got a shoulder injury, like a left shoulder, this affects you throwing the left hook. That's really important. If you've got a great left hook and it affects throwing the jab, it can also affect your defense as well. But Evander was able to navigate through the injuries and he was able to obviously still become the legend. Again, Floyd Mayweather is another reference point. I don't know if people know this, but Floyd Mayweather had hand injuries, but he reshaped his style. He became more defensive-minded. He was always a defensive-minded fighter, but he became more defensive-minded. And again, he was able to make adaptations to become a great fighter. Vladimir Klitschko, I only found this out today, had knee injuries. And of course, if you have a knee injury, this can affect mobility. And Vladimir Klitschko's defensive style relies on the jab, but it also relies on foot movement. But he was able to navigate effectively, even though he had this injury. And Joe Kozagi, the great Joe Kozagi, as some label the greatest British fighter of all time, the greatest Welsh fighter of all time, he had hand injuries. And it's funny because before Joe Kozagi fought Chris Eubank, he actually was known as a puncher, but because of the hand injuries, he had to take the power off the shots and he became more of an accumulative puncher. So there's an important thing here. And the important thing is that these fighters overcame their injuries because they made adaptations. Particularly Floyd Mayweather and Calzaghe having hand injuries, they made adaptations. They changed their styles. Now, the problem with injuries is that they can make your opponents more confident. So Moses Atama having an injury could make Jermaine Franklin more confident. And say if you had like a shoulder injury, your opponent can, hit your shoulder. And there's a psychological element to having an injury. There's a psychological element to you, the fighter who has an injury, and a psychological element to your opponent. So this could play on Moses Atama's mind depending on the nature of the injury. Let's also remember that Franklin is a good opponent for Moses Atama. Let's repeat that. Franklin is a good opponent for Moses Atama. If you look at his reference points, you have the Dillian Whyte fight and the Anthony Joshua fight. And I think in those fights, he showed technical ability, he showed desire and the ability to cope under pressure because the pressure of the bright lights. I actually rewatched extended highlights of the Dillian Whyte fight, and I really liked what I saw in that fight. The punch creativity, the speed, the accuracy. I think he showed a lot of talent in that fight. And this is a massive opportunity for Franklin. Now, obviously, we don't know what's going on in Franklin's camp. We don't know about his motivations. We don't know. He could come into this fight, back on that level that he had against Dillian Whyte and back on the level he had against Anthony Joshua and put in a great performance. Or maybe psychologically, he's in a different space. Who knows? But I guess you could ask the question, how does this injury reflect the rescheduling of the fight? Does this make Moses Atama less confident, or is he happy that it's rescheduled so he has time to heal? Is there more pressure on Moses Atama because of the injury? And I think the obvious importance is controlling the injury. And how do you control the injury? Well, you need to have successful injury prevention tools. I spoke about Filip Hrgović, and he has issues with cuts. In his last 3 fights, he has had cuts. And his obvious prevention tool is having Abel Sanchez, who is really good at working the cuts. So you have to have things in place to deal with problems that keep reoccurring. In some cases, you need to learn to adapt your style. So the Floyd Mayweather reference and with the Joe Calzaghe reference, they adapted their style. With Floyd Mayweather, he became more defensively minded. With Joe Calzaghe, he just took some of the power out of the punches. He threw more punches that were less powerful. And that enabled him to be a successful fighter, a great fighter. I guess, with Evander Holyfield or any fighter that has like a left shoulder injury, maybe then you focus on being more effective with your right hand. So there's adjustments that you can make, but obviously injuries are detrimental to your development. Going back to the cuts element, if you were trying to make a prevention protocol there in camp, maybe you have bigger headgear or bigger gloves. So it's not just about you in terms of making the adjustments. It's about your team. And Moses Atama, it's important that the team have a prevention. It's important that the team has an injury prevention protocol, but it's also important that they guide Moses Atama to maintain his positive psychology and to maintain his confidence, because this could be mentally a very difficult time for him with regards to that inner dialogue that boxers have. So I guess it's unfortunate that there is an injury. It's unfortunate that the injury has caused a postponement to the fight or a delay to the fight. But from a positive perspective, the fight will be rescheduled and only time will tell what will happen. Still, Moses Atama is potentially the new star of British heavyweight boxing, potentially globally. He's a huge talent. The fight against Dillian Whyte was a devastating stoppage. So he has so much potential. And obviously we're looking at whether Moses Atama will be able to realize that potential, because he brings so much to the table. The problem with British light heavyweights that no one is talking about. Now, there are various British light heavyweights that are good. You have Anthony Yarde, who has the speed, the power, and the excitement. He can compete at championship level, but objectively, he's not a champion. Then you have Craig Richards, also known as Spider. Good jab, good backhand. He's tall, he can control the distance, and again, he can compete at championship level. Then you have Joshua Buatsi, and he has good work rate. It's a good body puncher, and he sets those little traps. And I would say these fighters are good fighters, but the problem is that they're good fighters, right? So it's like when you define a fighter, is he British level, is he Commonwealth level? They've surpassed that. They definitely can beat top 10 fighters in the division, but are they good enough to be a champion? Because there's a difference between a contender and a champion. And based on the performances, you would say that those three fighters are just below championship level. And here's a problem. The top three are, I would say, Bivol, Butterbiev, and Benavidez. And those top three are elite. Maybe the jury's out on Benavidez. We don't know how good he is, but we know that Bivol is really good, a technical master. We know that Butterbiev is really good. So here's the problem. In another division, Yarde, Buatsi, and Craig Richards, maybe they could be champions. Maybe they could win a portion of the title. Think of it like this. Say in football, you have different leagues. You have like the Premiership, Division 1, Division 2, Division 3. It's like they're in the Premiership, but they're numbers 4, 5, and 6. And as opposed to being number 1, because obviously number 1, it doesn't look like anyone can beat Bivol at the moment. And apart from Bivol, it looks like no one can beat Butterbiev. And then Benavidez is looking incredible. The issue is that our British guys are really good, but the elite guys are on another level. You know, you look at our British guys and, you know, they'll win the British title, they'll win the Commonwealth title, they'll beat top 10 fighters, but can they compete with the Benavidezes of this world? And when you look at Anthony Yarde, we got an answer to that. And Anthony Yarde is a really good fighter. And I really like Anthony Yarde. I think he's very likable. And I think he's got championship experience. And I think he's had a good career. But when he fought Benavidez was on a different level. He couldn't cope with the pressure. And, you know, Benavidez respectfully totally brutalized him. And I would say that if you put Joshua Buatsi, Callum Smith, or Spider in with these guys, I don't know if there would be a different outcome, even though these are good fighters. What I'm trying to say here is that you can be a good fighter and be destroyed. You get destroyed by Benavidez doesn't mean you're a good fighter. But it's important to realize that our British guys, they deserve respect because there's levels, and it's hard to be a British champion. It's hard. It's hard to be a European champion, and it's hard to be top 10 fighters. So this isn't any disrespect towards them. Now let's talk about Callum Smith. Now, Callum Smith is a former world champion, and I think he used to have one of the best left hook counters in the game. He really did. And even today, he has diversity with that left hook. He can double it to the head. He can throw it head and then to the body, or he can go body, head. There's so much diversity and punch creativity with his left hand. And Callum Smith, a former world champion, has shown that he has high ring IQ. I thought his performance against George Groves was absolutely astounding. He was so dominant against a good champion. Now, I believe that there was context. I believe that George Groves may have been injured, but still, it was a dominant performance. The way he got the distance and dominated the fight, and the counter left hooks, and I believe there was a left hook to the body. They were devastating punches. And I would say if you put Callum Smith in his prime, he's definitely world level. He's capable of winning belts, even with this elite light heavyweight division. On his day, he can win. However, Callum Smith of today is good, but I don't think he would have the punch resistance to compete with Benavidez. He has the IQ, he has the boxing ability, he has the knowledge, but he probably doesn't have the punch resistance to compete. And obviously we have a reference point, which is what happened with the Beterbiev fight. Now, I don't know if there was context to that fight. I don't know if he had a bad camp or, if he had an injury or whatnot, but he was thoroughly beaten in that performance. And again, it just seems there's a difference between the elite, or there's a difference between the top of the division and the rest. And that difference is very significant. But it's important to recognize here that the problem isn't that we haven't got quality fighters. That is not the problem. The problem is that the people on the top are just so elite. And this is not a trainer issue. For example, Callum Smith, he has Buddy McGirt, well-respected trainer. Buatsi has Virgil Hunter, well-respected trainer. So this isn't a training issue, which would make you think it's not a boxing environment issue. And on the flip side, there is a British boxing ecosystem that's flourishing. Let me explain. Because there's many good British light heavyweight fighters, these British fighters, they can fight each other, they can generate good money, and these exciting fights can get exposure. So they've got, even if you can't compete at the elite level or win at the compete level, they can compete, but maybe not win at the elite level. There's still this British ecosystem where people can eat, and the boxing fans and the casual fans can be happy. And a good reference to that is the Liam Smith-Buatsi fight, which I thought was an amazing fight. There's a caveat again to this, because even though we have an elite at the British light heavyweight division, let's remember that even the elite fighters can be beaten on any given day, whether someone, comes in, underestimates their opponent, whether they have an injury, whether their reflexes are gone, or whether father time comes. Upsets are always possible. So it's not impossible, but as it stands, the levels are significantly different. But still, we have good British light heavyweights, very good British light heavyweights. And I'm very interested to see the development of Callum Smith, because I feel that he definitely has shown he objectively has operated at world level. And there's other questions when we talk about these elite operators. For example, how long has Bivol got left? I think he's returning from an injury. So how long has he got left in the game? How long has Beterbiev got left? I'm not sure what age he is. I think he might be, I know he's on the other side of 30, maybe approaching 40. And I think he's had some knee problems. So there is a prospect that in a couple of years, that Bivol and Beterbiev are maybe not operating within the boxing hemisphere. However, you still have Benavidez, and obviously there is the potential that Benavidez might go up. And if that happens, if those three fighters leave the division, then this British ecosystem, these British light heavyweights have a very good chance of becoming world champions. But this is the problem that they have. It's not that they're not good. They are good, really good fighters, but they're up against elite fighters.